ladies and gentlemen, it's time to eat crow. Welcome back. My name is Seth Estrada, and if you're watching this video, you're probably on my YouTube channel, Seth Estrada. Now, in years past, I've made no secret of my feelings towards Apple and their workstation line. When they debuted the so-called trash can Mac Pro, I made a parody video talking about how it looks like a can of coffee beans, how it looks like a little trash can, how it looks like Darth Vader's head, it looks like an ashtray, etc., right? Obviously, the Mac Pro circular design caused all kinds of problems for IT integrators, people who had to figure out how to put these things into, say, standard 42U racks alongside other stuff that actually just fits in a rack mount. And the new redesign to the Mac Pro kind of doesn't really get rid of that problem. However, I do believe that Apple has finally addressed some concerns that those of us who are serious content creators and serious about our IT have been complaining about for some time. This is truly the professional's Mac Pro. And Apple's back. So let's talk a little bit, without watching their film, let's talk a little bit about some of the design. You can see right here how the case slides off quickly. Is there any kind of locking system? We'll take a look at some of the design cues later on. And what is all this nonsense here, all these little chambers? Well, I think this is part of the strength of the design. And when Apple when they started to move away from the PowerPC platform and went into, before they moved from the PowerPC platform to the Intel architecture, x86 and x86-64, Apple started to design the Mac Pro with some pretty cool cues, right? With all aluminum unibody housing, with large doors on the side. Even HP took notice, and the Z800 workstation design cues owe a huge debt to the Apple design team. So there's quite a bit that's in terms of functionality that makes sense here. But again, there's quite a bit in terms of like IT integration that kind of doesn't. So think of this as a workstation, think of this as a one-off, think of this as going on somebody's desk or under somebody's desk, not going into a rack mount, obviously. However, for the individual contributor, this is a pretty solid offering. Let's take a look at all this stuff here. Those look like PCI Express slots, obviously, 16 lanes right there. But then internally, some of this doesn't make sense, so we'll kind of dive further in. Ignore a lot of the rhetoric of the copy. We're just going to take a look for ourselves. This is clearly the top-down view, and right here, there's just a twisting handle. It's not even really a lock. It's just a twisting handle. That's it. A 90-degree twist unlocks the top of this unibody cover and allows you to pull the top right off, the top of the enclosure right off, with those ports clearly not becoming detached. And then same with this power button and the LED that signals that the device is on. These handles out of tubular steel or chrome-plated whatever they look cool, but again, for IT integration, might cause some trouble. Who knows? Maybe there's an option to get this to fit a little more comfortably into maybe a 5U shelf or something. But I don't know. We'll take a look closer down the line. Of course, you would expect that there's a large prominent Apple logo on the side, and here is a closer look at that internal structure right here. Little locking button, obviously a USB port there, either for some kind of boot priority if you wanted to, say, boot to a different operating system or boot into a troubleshooting, like some sort of troubleshooting boot drive, like some version of Linux to help you check out disk integrity or something else, or do any kind of any kind of forensic work on your system. Maybe you have to find a file that you worry that you've deleted, and so you want to stop running the operating system and run from Linux. I imagine that is what this particular USB slot is for. And then right here, a couple of SATA ports, as you would expect, probably SATA 3, so you get a full 6 gigabits per second transfer speed there. And then here, full length, 16 lane PCI Express slots. That one may be fewer than 16 lanes, but those are obviously 16 lanes right there, and they appear to be single slot. Right here, Radeon Pro Vega 2 MPX module. What the heck is that? Well, they explain it later on. I think it's pretty cool what they did here, and this is where, again, my hat goes off to Apple for doing something very right. Yes, they're building within their walled garden. Yes, they want you to be fully locked in, but this is one of those instances in which I think Apple finally gives you a reason to want to opt in to that walled garden. So we'll talk about that a little down the line. 28 cores of power, so latest generation Xeon processors with up to 28 cores. Of course, the vast majority of people that they're selling to, creative professionals and individual contributors who need a workstation for rendering or for Photoshop or something, they're probably not going to go with all 28 cores. However, right here, there we go. The ultra large form factor heatsink is a big deal, and those heat pipes with numerous fins and plenty of space for dissipating heat, that's going to be a pretty big deal to anybody that values keeping noise low on their workstation. I mean, you don't even have to look at the rest of their marketing message here to kind of get, if you understand how technology works, you kind of get this equals low noise. And then right here, RAM slots on the other side of it, also cooled within their own air channel. This harkens back to the original Mac Pro design that moved from the polycarbonate housing to the all aluminum housing, where there were secure air channels for every different component within the Mac Pro. And I think this is something that Apple did very, very well. Dell and HP both at that point were interested in helping to streamline internal airflow so that fewer fans were necessary, and then larger diameter, slower rotating fans could be used in order to effectively cool these systems. That said, there's a little turbine right here that may generate a little bit more noise than some users are used to, but I don't know. We'll see. As far as the amount of RAM that you can put inside of this workstation, 1.5 terabytes of memory. That's awesome for people who are rendering really complex 3D scenes. And there may be some other additional fields where that makes sense. But yeah, large data sets, fitting them into memory, that makes sense. I mean, that can work. Or they're saying multiple applications simultaneously. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. But the fact that it installs on the other side of the motherboard, that's pretty cool, because this is a fairly low profile part. Let's just be real. Within a 4U case, for example, your expansion cards, like video cards, graphics cards, they don't take up a full 4U internally. You can fit full height GPUs inside of a 3U case, and there's still space to spare. So for them to put this on the back side of the motherboard is a pretty darn cool design. And frankly, I wish that more manufacturers would do this in order to allow for a more unique spacing of the GPU expandability. I wish that the beige box mentality of just 7 expansion slots would go away. I wish that we would just get past that and kind of place things differently on the motherboard. So kudos to Apple for this. Also, I do think that this is the right direction to start bringing RAM insertion on a full-size ATX motherboard or extended ATX motherboard. So now they talk about all the performance gains, right, of using different offerings they're going to launch with. But I'm just going to make a prediction here. The vast majority of units sold by Apple will launch with the 8-core, 12-core, and then to a lesser extent, 16-core. And the tiny minority of units that they sell will have the 24-core or the 28-core processor that they sell with it. Why? Because these are Intel parts, and it is possible, generally speaking, to circumvent Apple's markup on these parts by buying the lowest cost part from them, and then buying, if you want to do an expansion down the line or an upgrade down the line, doing that upgrade on your own. Or if you work at a studio, having the IT staff there install the upgrade for you after the initial base model is purchased. So this is the oldest trick in the book when it comes to getting Apple hardware, and then just buying commodity parts for the upgrade yourself and saving hundreds of dollars. It is worth spending 2 hours doing the upgrade on your own when you're dealing with Apple hardware, especially in the high end, in the Mac Pro series and now the iMac Pro series, anything that's kind of the higher end of the product line. So I suspect that a lot of the 8-core models are going to be bought, some of the 12-core models, some of the 16-core models, but very few of the 24-core and even fewer of the 28-core. That said, they're of course going to show you they put their best foot forward right here. The iMac Pro does come with the 18-core Xeon, so they have to show how much better it is to go with their 28-core. In all likelihood, the 16-core is not going to show any performance gain over the iMac Pro with the 18-core Intel processor. So again, the real performance is going to be in doing a discrete upgrade with commodity upgrade parts, or possibly even used parts. But, you know, you do what you want with your time and your money and your brand new Apple Mac Pro if you feel comfortable doing it. But right here, 8 PCI Express expansion slots. That fits the profile of the extended ATX form factor. And what I'm going to do, this is unheard of. I'm going to go crazy here. But I'm going to drag over, first off, go from full screen to this size right here. I'm going to drag over a motherboard that Linus Tech Tips covered a few years ago. And this is by Asus. It's now a little bit older, but this right here, these are 7 full-size slots right here. And this fits the typical beige box PC ATX motherboard and case form factor. You don't have to use an extended ATX case. However, you notice right here, there's not much space in between these slots in order to fit full height and double slot width GPUs, because that's the current state of professional GPUs, or even just consumer GPUs for gaming, right? They require 2 slots because the heat sink comes off of the card and it's so beefy to offload all that heat that you need a full 2 slots to fit the fans and the heat sink fins themselves in order to cool down that really hot chip, right? They're more performant than they've ever been. But you notice on this board right here, you've got all of these slots working at least 8 lanes of PCIe 3.0, and several of them, at least 2 of them, running at 16 lanes. So this is a very high performance board here, very high performance board, and you can pick it up on Amazon for under $600 shipped. And then, of course, you have to buy a couple of Xeon processors in order to address all of those lanes because it's older technology. But you can expand the motherboard RAM to quite a bit as well. All I'm saying is that the idea of having a lot of full-length slots is not new. And in a post-mining world, well, a lot of people actually expect it. So, just throwing that out there. But 8 PCI Express expansion slots, that would be cool if they were spaced out in more than single slot. Oh, wait a second. But what's this? That's exactly what Apple did. So again, kudos Apple. I think you're really onto something. I think this is exactly what the industry needs to see. That we allow for multiple double-wide PCI Express full-length slots and then additional single-width slots. Or maybe even a form factor that allows for all double-width slots for anything that has the full 16-lane connectivity. Now right here, this is a half-length slot like they're saying. I kind of wish that Apple would use like normal nomenclature here and just say this is an 8-lane PCI Express slot. It's not a half-length slot. It's 8 lanes. If we do, I don't even know if we can. Oh my gosh, I broke it. Okay, we can't actually even zoom in on this image, and I sincerely wish we could to get a better view. Right there, that spacer that's in place, why not allow for full-length cards to be installed here, but then only allow for 8 lanes of electrical connectivity? That's what any other workstation class board manufacturer would do. And in fact, Supermicro, HP, and, well, not HP, but Supermicro, Tie-In, and others that make workstation and server class boards, that's exactly what they do. So you can drop a full-length card into a slot like this, and even though the speed is decreased, it's still a very useful way to deploy expansion cards and use your expansion slots. So anyway, that's a little bit of a rant from me, but it's over. Right here, the interesting thing about these double width slots that Apple has left here is that you can leverage all 4 of these for cards that you already have. Now, if you have, for example, NVIDIA cards, you can now drop in NVIDIA cards. You don't just have to use AMD if you don't want to. Now, AMD is they make some really great products, right? And some really great GPUs. However, there are some, especially creative professionals, that have really invested a lot of money into their NVIDIA hardware. I know, for example, a visual effects pro here that went far out of his way to get the latest generation, I think 24 gig RAM, 24 gig NVIDIA workstation class cards, and he's got a couple of these GPUs. I know that he would want to have both of those placed into a system like this if he chose to go back to macOS. That said, Apple's kind of the way that they turned a blind eye to the creative professionals over the last several years by issuing the trash can Mac Pro got a lot of people like him to say, I don't want to go back. I don't want to deal with Apple kind of yanking me around and telling me what I can and can't do. So a lot of them have gone to Linux, and then a lot of them, even more, have gone to Windows. When they thought they would never use Windows, they've gone to Windows because they found that expansion like this was not painful. So anyway, your mileage may vary. However, another thing that I'll say in favor of Apple's design here is that having the motherboard placed on the opposite side, or having the motherboard placed on the opposite side of the case, which is kind of Apple's MO, means that I'm going to have to use, there we go, I'm going to have to create a snapshot so that we can then draw on this. But now I'm going to draw in a GPU right in this spot right here. If a GPU is 2 slots wide right here, and it kind of fits right there, there's the mounting point, mounting hardware there, mounting hardware there. The actual PCB lines up with that slot. And then the heatsink comes up off of it, allowing for better natural heat dissipation as heat rises up across those fins. And then, of course, is ejected out using a typical fan blower design. Hot air is then forced out, but it allows for the heat to naturally rise off of the PCB into those fins on the heatsink. So kudos Apple, even that very small design cue there is going to go a long way towards improving efficiencies on this board, I suspect. So moving downward though, you notice that this lines up with the 16-lane PCI Express slot. What is that? Well, Apple announced what it is, and they kind of go through some explanation here as well. It's a full-length module that allows them to run additional PCI Express lanes into a custom PCB that they designed in conjunction with AMD. So kudos AMD for doing this right here. There you go. PCI Express 16 lane, 75 watts of power is what we typically expect. But here, this additional PCIe connector, see that fat rail on the front? That allows them to add a lot of wattage, so up to 475 watts of power added to that initial 75 watts, and you've got 550 watts of power being run to this card. Quick math tells you that that's over 250 watts per core, which should be enough to operate this thing at full tilt under even the worst of conditions. So pretty cool. Radeon Pro Vega 2, which was released, of course, before Radeon 7, but after the first generation Radeon. It's a very efficient platform and already deployed in cloud infrastructure and in server environments. But this is a very, very capable board. In fact, speaking of capability, let's look at these caps right here along the sides. Look at all those capacitors, right? And look at all these voltage modules here, right? And RAM, that's right along the side there. So this is an extremely capable single board design. However, it's a full length, it's workstation length, definitely what you'd expect to see in a workstation or a server, but a lot more PCIe connection and a lot more power delivery over PCIe. So kudos Apple here for keeping cable clutter down. No additional Molex connectors, nothing to melt, nothing to cause problems, other than, who knows, maybe the power runs along the main motherboard. But I really like this design, and it would be awesome if a design like this became mainstream so we didn't have to worry about running additional power out to components like GPUs or FPGAs or additional coprocessors within our main system. So, hey, motherboard manufacturers, reach out to Apple, see if you can license this design, or see if you can work directly with AMD to have an additional license of this design granted to you so you can use this kind of design moving forward. I'd love to stop running additional power cables to components, or just have those power cables run directly to the main board. It's how we do it with certain mining designs, like the W250 mining design, having additional power run to the board. There's no reason we can't do it in the future for gaming designs and for other enthusiast and workstation designs. So pretty cool stuff. Power plus power, I don't know. The rhetoric does get pretty good, but 32 gigs of memory, call it 1 terabyte per second of memory bandwidth. Okay, all right, maybe. maybe 1 terabyte per second. Could be the latest version. So a bit like with the Radeon 7. It's a very beastly processor. And I'm going to say it just once. This thing would slay at mining. It would just absolutely slay. So if you've been seriously considering the Radeon 7 and you're in the market for a graphics workstation, then who knows, maybe this will work out for you, because Apple's going to throw 2 of these modules into here. But they also show a side view of this that to me is pretty exciting. Oh, sorry, there we go. Infinity Fabric Link. Failed to mention that. The Infinity Fabric Link here allows for much faster data transfer between these 2 cores as well. So in terms of dealing with any kind of workloads where you need intercore or you need out-of-core processing and you need these 2 cores to communicate, then this is a phenomenal design. Now, with GPU mining in the cryptocurrency space might not be as essential. However, you are going to get phenomenal hash rates from cards like this where there is sort of out-of-core processing needed or where there's a high degree of intercore communication needed. So Radeon 7, imagine, like I imagine that you're going to see like double the Radeon 7 hash rates coming out of cards like this. Now, who in the right mind is going to buy a Mac Pro, new Mac Pro, just for mining cryptocurrency? Man, I don't know, but somebody's going to be crazy enough to do it. You let me know in the comments if you want to see this guy be crazy enough to do it, because I might just do it. Anyway, just saying. Might be crazy enough. So double the bandwidth right there, double the core count on a single card, all the power delivery over PCIe with this new PCIe expanded connection there. Though, let me say for the record, this is not a new design. This is not a new design. Supermicro and other server board manufacturers, they create custom 28-lane and 40-lane even PCIe connectors and expansion boards because they have to come up with unique form factors for, say, like single U or 2U designs that still incorporate a lot of PCIe density and a lot of PCIe I/O. That is to say, a lot of bandwidth for PCIe connected devices inside of their server designs. And so Supermicro's been doing this for forever. So has HP, so has Dell, so is Tyan. Again, any company that's in the business of making server motherboards has had to come up with their own unique PCIe connection slot scheme at some point. So this is not a new thing, but this is kind of a relatively new thing for the workstation class and for something that's going to go into the hands of sort of an air quotes average consumer, somebody that might use this for Photoshop, right? And put this device on their desk. That's where this is kind of novel. You don't normally find people taking whatever, a tie-in server case, right, 4U or 6U server case, and slapping it on top of their desk and trying to showcase it as some sort of like fancy piece of art or whatever. Look, the nice looking device. No, these things go into server racks and they stay out of sight, out of mind. So again, kudos to Apple for bringing this to the desktop. That's kind of a cool thing. And I hope this trend continues. But looking at this from the side profile, boom, you see right here again, this is where I really appreciate the design that they made. Now, granted, this is just a 3D mock-up right here. This is not a finalized design. You can tell this is not actually the finished product. But seeing how the channel is right there, the air channel, seeing the wide ultra-high airflow design with the high surface area fins that are there from edge to edge, this is going to be a very quiet device. Look again at that. And imagine that being able to get cooled down at the sound of your case fans. You could probably hear like my desktop GPU right now, and it's not, I mean, I'm not even putting it under load. This thing is going to be very, very quiet. So I'm just really impressed. That said, if it is for genuine workstation use and not for, say, like mining or right, or AI model training or machine learning or whatever, really, really intense GPU workloads that are like 24/7, then yeah, you can get away with a design like this. That's part of the reason that AMD's workstation designs have been mostly blower based, right? Had the blower reference design for so long. They're not always under load. And so they can get away with just ramping up that blower design intermittently, right? Like once every so often when the GPU or OpenCL workload goes so heavy that you finally have to get the heat off of that card. This is going to be interesting. This is where I think Apple took the best of the trash can Mac design, Mac Pro design, and they finally married it to a sensible expandable approach where you've got access to PCIe connectors again, finally. So bravo, Apple, you did it. You brought back PCIe expandability in a sort of more traditional workstation design, but you didn't skimp on the overall, like factoring in TDP and cooling that system quietly. So this is pretty darn cool. That said, they talk here about the numbers. Again, this is typical Apple. I really don't like the way this is presented. Radeon Pro, why aren't you? So it can come with a Radeon Pro 580X. I'm a little bit confused here. I don't even know what they mean with some of these numbers. But Vega 2, either 2 MPX modules, which is 2 GPUs, or one with 1 GPU. Like, I'm just not. Yeah. Anyway, it's not perfectly clear, but the bottom line is they're going to try to show you the top of the line, which is 4 GPU cores and 2 of these modules. And that is, boom, right here, where it is far, far faster. The OpenCL score, of course, is going to be way faster. And render speed on Final Cut Pro X, that's impressive and all. I think it's going to be interesting to see who benchmarks DaVinci Resolve on this system first, because DaVinci Resolve has been eating Apple's lunch, especially Final Cut Pro. People who are diehard Final Cut Pro users have been switching to DaVinci Resolve, thanks to reviewers like Max Yuriev, who've been able to directly benchmark how much better the OpenCL implementation on DaVinci Resolve is than it has been on Final Cut Pro X. And that took some doing. So kudos to the Blackmagic team for that. But I'd love to see just how fast 4 of these Vega 2 GPU cores, just how fast they are on DaVinci Resolve, especially when they're in that Infinity Fabric PCB interconnect, right? So where you've got basically 2 dual GPUs instead of really 4 GPU cores. So that could be pretty impressive. We'll see how that works. Now, the Apple Afterburner, what is that? Oh, looks like it's a little drop-in card right there that doesn't require a whole lot of cooling, but they do have clearly some kind of a heatsink channel right there. Even though it's a single slot, it is a long heatsink channel right there, full length. So they've got, I would guess, that entire channel right there is filled with top to bottom heatsink fins in order to cool off whatever the element is there. But what is it? It is an FPGA. It is an onboard coprocessor for video transcoding. Awesome. Now they don't say it right there. Sorry, they say it down here. Hardware accelerator. Think like Red Rocket from Red Digital Cinema, but for your ProRes RAW. Now here's where Apple wants to lock you into their system. I don't know that this is what the serious professional is going to consider using. ProRes was an interesting product of its time, interesting codec, but it didn't take long for it to be dethroned by other codecs, or for the use case to be debunked by other either free or open source codecs. I'm thinking mainly of Avid DNX HD, for example, at the same bit rates, being just as usable, being cross-platform and portable. And then, of course, not having licensing restrictions for encoding or transcoding on Windows, right? For the longest time, working with ProRes on Windows was very painful. You could read, but you really couldn't write back out to ProRes. So ProRes RAW, ProRes 422, I imagine that Apple is going to keep on trying to lock you in as a creator here. And of course, getting a really high quality FPGA that can allow for co-processing of this codec, that's just good business on Apple's part. Now, let's talk a little bit about the magic here. I'm going to get another screenshot going and let's do another overwrite here. Now, the issue that I take with this is that ProRes RAW, 8K ProRes RAW, and 4K ProRes RAW, these are likely going to be variants of the J2K or the MJPEG 2000 codec. By any other name, this is Cineform, right? This is a kind of riffing off of what Cineform did over 10 years ago for high definition video across platforms, which of course Cineform was bought by GoPro at the peak of their profitability. There's nothing new under the sun, I'll put it that way. But I would guess that instead of using a discrete sine transform, discrete cosine transform, that it's a discrete wavelet transform or discrete wave transform that allows them to get really high compression rates so that it's raw, visually lossless, even though it may be compressed. And when decompressing that kind of footage, it definitely helps to use some kind of a coprocessor, an FPGA. It's not impossible to create a really good coprocessing decoder for this kind of footage with an FPGA. Sony did it over 10 years ago. They made a really good coprocessor for HDV content over 10 years ago, but never released it. It was just in the labs and they showed it off at NAB exactly once. What I would love to see is I'd love to see a product that competes with this, because porting this over to, let's say a system like this, where, you know, this is not the most fancy thing. It just really isn't. Let me take a look at this board a little closer. But porting it over to something like this, where you may only need a couple of full-length slots to run at 16 lanes for your GPU coprocessing, and then allowing another slot to access your FPGA, or maybe even two of them. You might want to get wild and crazy. But you can take older commodity hardware and you can get a lot of the functionality that you see in the new Mac Pro effectively, not for free, but for the price of an upgrade, not for the price of a brand new system that is custom just for these kinds of upgrades to be used on. That makes sense. So 16 streams of 4K ProRes 422, that's impressive to be sure. Definitely impressive. However, there are video encoding devices right now, appliances, boxes that can encode video like at 4K, 16 streams of 4K right now. I believe that Blackmagic has one available from their website. But getting into the raw decoding, that's where you've got an entirely separate codec that may be based on more advanced, much higher visually lossless quality than even what the base ProRes has, or what something like Avid DNX HD offers. So I'd love to see more competition in this space, in the codecs and in the decoding hardware space. Red Rocket was great for Red, and I'm sure that this new, what Apple is calling their Afterburner, I'm sure that this is going to be really good for their codecs and for their systems. But I'd love to see a third-party option that runs on macOS, now that we have hardware that'll allow for third-party accelerators that runs on macOS, Windows, and Linux. That would be amazing. A coprocessor that's just for security. This sounds an awful lot like TPM. Now let's just search for this live. Trusted Platform Module. TPM. This is a secure coprocessor that's been part of an ISO spec for a long, long time. There you go. Random number generation. Cryptographic keys for limited uses. And guess which operating systems have already had support for this? Unfortunately, yeah, you guessed it. Windows. Windows Pro has had support for trusted platform modules. For how long? Well, for a while. For a while. So please do not be confused when Apple says that this is a first. So let's just kind of be clear about this. It's the most secure tower they've ever built. It just took them 13 years to catch up. Thank you for doing the right thing, Apple. It's about bloody time. So I'm not going to focus too much on that. Allowing for 2 mSATA slots. Hey, that's great. There are many open hardware motherboards that allow for 2 M.2 slots. So you can already have up to 4 terabytes of storage in M.2. In fact, with several motherboards, you can even put them in a RAID configuration within the BIOS, so you got extra fast OS storage. So that's cool to see that Apple is also finally getting on board with that. And then the I/O, I'm not really sure what they mean by USB-A ports. Do they mean USB Type-C ports? Oh, no. On the back, USB Type-A connectors. But which version of USB? Is it USB 3.0 or 3.1? I hope it's 3.1, and I hope I hope it's the full 10 gigabit connection. And then dual 10 gigabit mix. That's great. That's just great. And then 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. So I guess on the rear of the device and on the top, these are not technically USB Type-C. These are actually Thunderbolt 3 connectors, which is great. 40 gigabits per second. That's a lot of data throughput. So that's awesome. And then, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it there. And then the new display. They've got a brand new 6K display, which I'm sure is going to look great. But I think for a lot of creative professionals, they may just want to find some other display devices that fit a little more closely what their destination display devices are going to look like. Whether it's digital signage or digital cinema or web content creation, they're probably just going to want to preview what they're making on the screens where people will be consuming their content. That's best practice, has been for a long time now, and I'm sure will be for a long time to come. But it's cool to see that Apple is making an upgraded display. Cool story. Those are my thoughts so far. Yeah, I think there's some positives here, and definitely some applause can be given to Apple for doing some things that are innovative. Again, adding power delivery to their PCIe slots, right? Or to their graphics cards, and then doing a dual chip design with Infinity Fabric to link these two Vega 2 cores. 32 gigs of RAM on this chip or on this board with 2 Vega 2 cores is going to be a very performant, very tough to beat solution for a while, at least for a year, maybe 18 months to 2 years. It's going to be hard to find anything that competes with this, and especially with the integrated cooler heatsink that's fanless and passive that allows for slow rotating, large diameter fans on the front and rear of their case to cool it down very quietly. Not silently, of course, but very quietly. So this is a pretty big deal. Just that alone, I think, is going to be meaningful to workstation class users, people who do creative content creation. And then, of course, doing that same kind of air channel for the main CPU, where it's the best of both worlds, right? Best of the trash can Mac Pro, or the coffee bean can Mac Pro, paired with finally expandability, a lot of expandability. And then same with putting the RAM slots on the flip side, on the underside of the main motherboard PCB. There are a couple of mini ITX designs on the PC side, on the open hardware side, that allow for this for, say, the M.2 slot, but not for RAM. This is pretty darn cool because it frees up all that space to start putting PCIe slots here all the way up the backside of the board. That's amazing. I would love for ATX to get a major overhaul to reflect some of the changes that are being pioneered by Apple here. And you heard me say it. You got to give credit where it's due. This is a pioneering design, and I really do think that the ATX spec, there should be a variant or an alternate of the ATX spec that allows for PCI Express expandability all the way along the rear I/O of the board, so that it's all expansion slots along one side of the board, and so that typical access ports can be placed alongside it using expansion ports, right? So if you want to have, for example, an audio jack, you can add that on one of those expansion slots at your convenience anywhere you think you need it. But I think we've finally come to a point where we just don't necessarily need to have those built into every motherboard, or if we do, they can be offered to consumers as a PCIe expansion card, a separate PCB, or in a form factor that then is built up vertically or perpendicular to the board to access all of the PCIe slots along the back. So while I think that Apple has pioneered something here, I think we can take it a step further. And within this sort of typical 4U or rack mount design of about 19 inches from here to here, we can have plenty of PCIe connectivity from one side to the other side. All right, so kudos Apple for innovating here in this design space, for allowing for RAM to be on the underside of the PCB, for pushing for more passive, cooler designs for the CPU, That's awesome, keeping up that legacy from the trash can Mac Pro. And then for allowing for these new modules, not that they're the most innovative thing, but for pushing forward to allow for more power to be delivered to the GPUs and expanding the amount of connectivity to each one of these slots here. Now, what isn't readily distinguishable here is exactly, you can see it right there actually, that there's going to be power delivery along this front part of the slot right there, big old rail. So each side, big old slab right there, just like you'd see on maybe server class power supply from HP or something. That's clearly for power delivery, but right here, these are PCI Express lanes. So we've got 16 lanes here. Oh, maybe they're not. Actually, they don't go full length there. So that right there that's impressive. I wonder exactly what's going to be sent over these pins. But I imagine that it's going to be PCIe lanes. So that's a lot of lanes right there. 32 lanes, 32 lanes. A whole lot of PCIe lanes. And I'm excited by seeing that design as well. I'd love to see this become possibly a new standard that's adopted by other workstations and other motherboard manufacturers. You and I know you can run any operating system you want on this hardware, right? Finally, you can run Linux, you can run Windows if you really feel like it, if you don't prefer Mac Pro or Mac OS. But of course, you don't have to choose. You can run all three in a triple configuration or run two of them inside of a virtual machine with a host OS as your main daily driver. But let me know in the comments, what did I miss? Is there something about this that is wrong? We don't really know pricing yet, so there's kind of that to consider down the line. And right here, design, oh boy. Oh boy. Hey, look, it's a Hemi design. I'm just kidding. I don't want to see that. So, tubular steel. Oh, I spoke too soon. Here we are with those large diameter fans. Looks like we've got 120 millimeter, 140 millimeter fans right there. Well placed at that point. And then the intake looks like it allows for this turbine right there. It expands that funnel for intakes right there to cool the backside of those chipsets from the backside of the motherboard. Aha! Look at that. They even kind of show a little bit of a diagram right here. Everything's kind of runs straight through. So RIP cards right here that are getting all the runoff from the CPU cooler, CPU heatsink, and then RIP any SATA cabling you put right there that's getting full brunt of the heat blast. I'm just kidding. That's going to be fine. Let's look at the lower side. Woo! Hey, look at that. Okay, so yeah, and then the RAM slots are effectively all pulled into this blower fan right here with additional cool air being brought through that funnel. I don't know what additional chipsets are being cooled there, but again, it's not a terrible design. I think it's just fine. And depending on what kind of workloads you're doing, frankly, very few RAM chips need to be cooled that much. Unless you're overclocking the snot out of them, which frankly, I don't think there's a whole lot of call for in most applications. Oh boy. Yeah, please don't tell me that it's inspired by nature. Okay, yeah, the sort of Hemi design right there. I think it's just got a lot of airflow through a front grille that's unlikely to allow anything to spill inside of it. There you go, the stainless tubular steel. That's got to be good grip feel in terms of actually picking the thing up, based on the previous designs as well. And they really want you to know about that new display. I'm not interested in taking a look at that because it's going to be overpriced and certainly perform well, but not enough to justify the ridiculous price. So it looks like there's not a whole lot of difference between these different models. Oh, except for that they created an average before in their marketing materials as far as the amount of RAM that's accessible by the different chipsets. With the 8-core, apparently it's 1 full terabyte of RAM, and with the 24 and the 28-core, it's clearly up to 2 full terabytes of RAM. Kind of overkill, but they just said 1.5 terabytes before. I don't really know what to make of that, but this is a little more informative. I guess thanks for not keeping me ignorant to the all the specs, Apple. What the heck? Oh, I see now. So what you're saying is that chipset supports 2 terabytes of memory, but the memory configuration here only allows for inserting up to 1.5 terabytes. Got it. That makes a little bit more sense. And it looks like the turbo boost of almost every model except for the entry-level model is 4.4 gigahertz. So pretty performant at the 12-core model right there. again, that kind of reinforces my guess that the bread and butter models are going to be the 8-core, 12-core, and 16-core. But now I'm guessing possibly even more so the 12-core. Okay, taking a look at this right here, 36 compute units, 2304 stream processors. That makes sense. This is Polaris that they're talking about right here. We're used to that. But the Vega Pro, or the Pro Vega 2, 64 compute units, 4096 stream processors. Now that's a little bit misleading. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I fundamentally misunderstood. These models each have 32 gigabytes of memory, HBM2 per core. Wow. Their Pro Vega 2 Duo is going to be a killer. 64 gigs of HBM2 with over 8,000 stream processors and 128 compute units between them. Wow. 84 gigabytes per second on the Infinity Fabric Link. This should be pretty impressive. Again, really impressive. And a power supply of 1.4 kilowatts. Now, they want to make sure that you can run it on 110 volt at home. There you go. Yeah, if you're running it at particularly low voltage, you're going to have apparently struggle with how much it'll give you. And it looks like, it's equivalent to like a 1300 watt power supply in enthusiast terms, but is switching as well, so you can run on 110 volt or 220 volt. Obviously, with a workstation like this, you're going to want to run it on 220 if you can. And then the slots here, 500 watts of power for the MPX module. Hey, look at that. The MPX bays here, so they're calling that. The MPX bays is 16 lanes and then 8 lanes of PCIe 3.0. Gotta say, it's pretty darn impressive. And apparently they're using that for the Thunderbolt connectivity within that board, not really for communicating with the GPU cores. All right, and then apparently one of the bays is 2 16-lane PCIe 3.0 slots. One of them is 16 lanes plus 8 lanes. All right. That's pretty impressive. And it looks like, yeah, the rest of the remaining slots, there are limitations to the Intel chipset, so they're not all 16 lanes of connectivity. That's to be expected. Unless they use the dual chip design with more PCIe lanes, they wouldn't be able to get 16 lanes across each slot. So this is kind of lining up with my expectations. And also, again, let's peel back the curtain one more time. It's kind of in line with market offerings that already exist. You can only put so many PCIe lanes on a given board with a given chipset. Now here on the ASUS board, you've got 2 Xeon processors, so you've got double the lane count. Of course, in this case, it's only about 40 lanes per card. You only got 80 lanes total to share across all of these PCIe slots. So there we go. This makes a lot more sense. Thank you, Apple, for publishing these specs. It helps keep me from scratching my head too much. There you go. And that half-length slot apparently is 4 lanes. That makes a lot more sense as well. Aha! Okay, and the Afterburner, their FPGA video codec accelerator. It's a full 16-lane card. That's good to know. The storage, yep, again, 2 M.2 modules, and it's an I/O card for these. And that's what goes into that 4-lane PCI Express slot. Hey, and now they're admitting it's actually calling it USB-A. This is just disturbing, Apple. What you mean is USB 3.0 Type A connector. So it's USB 3.0, not 3.1. Womp womp. And then the 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, of course, that's where they make up for it. All that bandwidth is going through those. 40 gigabits per second. It's really hard to beat. Thunderbolt, if you're going to connect an external RAID, for example, Thunderbolt would be the way to do it. It'd be preferable even to USB 3.1, right? So there's that. Wait, what? Oh, or you can connect it in USB-C mode, which, yeah, does bring it down to USB 3.1 speeds. I think what you mean is USB 3.1 Type-C connector. You're welcome, Apple. I'll send you an invoice later on. And then DisplayPort also makes sense because you can do DisplayPort over Thunderbolt. So sure, connect a display over those ports. That's cool. The one issue, though, is that with that Xeon processor, I don't think you're going to have support for video. I'm not sure where support for those displays is going to come from. I don't know. 2 10 gigabit network interface cards or network interface ports right there. That's pretty cool. Definitely a good addition there. Thank you for providing those. That's going to make a difference when integrating this into any kind of a serious work environment. Built-in speaker, 3.5mm headphone jack with headset support. But where is it? We didn't see. Wireless built in, 8.2.11 AC, and then ABGN compatible, backwards compatible, Bluetooth 5.0. All built in. That you would expect that on a premium device from Apple, because let's face it, this is going to be as expensive as any desktop computer can be from Apple. 8.58 inches, and there you go. All right, so from edge to edge, 17.7 inches. That means that this case can effectively be put into a rack mount. So bravo, Apple, you did it. This can be put either on some kind of a shelf, or perhaps you will sell for enterprise customers some kind of a rack mount adapter kit for these models. Not because that's the most practical way of deploying workstations. Spoiler alert, it's not. But it's going to make a difference to some users. Weight, 40 pounds. Warranty, 90 days. 1 year. Okay, 1 year limited warranty. Dang. USB-C to Lightning cable? I'm confused. It's the same connector. Mac OS. Oh, sweet. I can get a Mac Pro and I get iMovie for free? Thanks, Apple. I'm glad I get GarageBand too. Wow. I'm so glad that I got Mac OS Pro. Oh, wait. There is no Mac OS Pro. Again, I'm just poking fun. There's not really a version of Mac OS Pro because you have a lot of the Pro level features already built in to every version of it. But it is kind of funny to see consumer-oriented apps shipping on a Pro device that's going to have like a median build price of like $10,000. Why would you care about having iMovie? Just funny. All right, kits and accessories, Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro. There you go. What I don't understand is why Apple doesn't just bundle Final Cut Pro or licenses for Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro like into the price of a device like this. Like, what do you think people are going to be using these for? I don't know. If that's the Pro software that you sell. Just a thought. Anyway, I promise this is the end. What do you think? Did I leave anything out? I think we pretty much covered everything. I'm sure the keynote says something about this, but these are my observations. I think that Apple can be given some credit for doing something innovative with the motherboard design and innovative with their heat sinks in terms of creating a really good design. Like they learned from the trash can experience and the backlash that came from releasing such an incredibly gutless, bloody wonder that is, like, on the one hand, powerful enough, right? Because it had so many CPU and GPU cores, but on the other hand, limited all expandability to an absurd level, right? Such a polished turd, that trash can Mac Pro. And then prior to that, years of releasing expandable options that professionals actually used. And now they've found something in between. So kudos to Apple for doing that. Do I think it's the most innovative thing? Well, obviously not. Other workstation and server class motherboard manufacturers have done this and more, right? They've done this and even more. But putting RAM on the backside of the motherboard, awesome. Allowing for a greater number of PCIe slots in a more unique configuration, awesome. Allowing for a brand new GPU motherboard or GPU PCB that allows for higher density and power delivery, awesome. So much good stuff that Apple has done there that I think should trickle into the industry. I don't know that I want to see Apple be the only company that sells this kind of design. All right, let me know in the comments. What did I miss? Where did I get wrong? You tell me. Thank you for watching this video to the end. You're the reason I make this media. I love your face. And I will see you in the next one.